So, what happens when someone passes away without leaving a will? How is their property actually divided? In this explainer, we're going to dive deep into the crucial framework of intestate succession. We'll be focusing specifically on the property of a Hindu male, all as governed by the landmark Hindu Succession Act of 1956.
Here's the roadmap for our discussion today. We're going to build this up from the ground, starting with the Act's scope and what property it covers. Then we'll map out the four-tier succession hierarchy, figure out who exactly falls into Class I and II, and then unpack the rules for how everything is distributed. After that, we'll see how the law works in the real world through some landmark cases, and finally, we'll wrap it all up with a summary of the key principles.
Okay, let's get right into it with Section 1. Here, we're going to lay the groundwork, covering the scope of the Act, the type of property it applies to, and the foundational principles behind this really crucial piece of legislation.
You know, the Hindu Succession Act of 1956 wasn't just another law. It was a massive turning point. It really represented a complete paradigm shift, intentionally moving Indian inheritance law away from those ancient, and let's be honest, often gender-biased customs toward a much more uniform and secular framework for everyone.
So what kind of property are we actually talking about? Well, the Act covers self-acquired property, separate property, and an individual's interest in what's called Midikshara coparcenary property. That's basically ancestral property held by a joint Hindu family. The legal nitty-gritty is found mainly in Section 6 for partition and then Sections 8 through 13 for the distribution rules. And what's truly a game-changer here is Section 14. This is what elevated female heirs from having just a restrictive limited estate to becoming absolute owners of their property, a huge historical shift.
All right, next up in Section 2, we're going to look at the very heart of this system, the four-tier succession hierarchy. This is where we find the general rules of succession, all clearly laid out in Section 8 of the Act.
The order of priority here is absolutely rigid. First up, you have the Class I heirs. They all inherit together, and they all get equal shares. Now, if there are no Class I heirs, only then do we move down to the Class II heirs. And here, each entry on the list excludes the one below it. If that class is also empty, we then look to the Agnates, relatives connected only through males. And finally, if there's still no one, the property goes to the Cognates, who are relatives connected through at least one female.
Now let's move from the structure to the actual people. In Section 3, we're going to get into the details and see exactly who qualifies as an heir under Class I and Class II.
Class I heirs are the inner circle, and they all inherit at the same time. This group includes the most immediate family, right? The son, daughter, widow, and mother. It also goes down to the children and the widow of a son who has already passed away, and the children of a predeceased daughter. But here's the absolutely crucial point, the 2005 amendment. This brought in 3 generations of descendants through a predeceased daughter's line, which was a massive step towards gender equality in succession law.
Now, if there are no Class I heirs, we move on to the Class II list. And unlike Class I, this is a very strict hierarchy. Entry I is the father. If he's alive, he takes everything and no one below him gets a single thing. If he's not around, then we move to Entry II, which includes specific grandchildren and siblings. You have to completely exhaust each entry before you can even think about moving to the next one, all the way down to Entry IX.
Okay, so we've identified the heirs. Now for the big question. How is the property actually divided up? In Section 4, we'll focus on the specific distribution rules, which are laid out in Sections 9 through 13 of the Act. For Class I heirs, the rules under Section 10 are pretty straightforward. The widow, or if there are multiple widows, all of them together, they take one single share. Then the surviving son, daughter, and mother each get one share for themselves. This is called per capita. But for the family of a child who died before the property owner, the division is per stirpes. What this means is that entire branch of the family collectively gets the one share their parent would have received, and then they have to divide that one share amongst themselves.
Right, and for those third and fourth tiers, you really need to get the difference between Agnates and Cognates. Let's make it simple. Think of Agnates as relatives connected entirely through a male-only chain of command, like your father's brother's son. Cognates, on the other hand, are relatives where the connection at some point passes through a female. For example, your mother's brother's daughter.
Theory is one thing, but how does all of this actually work in the real world? In Section 5, we're going to see the law in practice. We'll look at how landmark court cases and practical problems have really shaped how this law is applied today.
Let's talk about the huge case of Vanita Sharma versus Rakesh Sharma from 2020. The central question was pretty simple. For a daughter to be a coparcener,
Did her father have to be alive when the 2005 amendment was passed? The Supreme Court's analysis was that coparceners is an unobstructed heritage. It's a right you get the moment you're born, not something that's given to you. So the groundbreaking conclusion? A daughter is a coparcener by birth, full stop. It makes no difference if her father passed away before 2005.
And that brings us to another monumental legal question. Can children who were born outside of a valid marriage inherit a share in their parents' ancestral property?
The Supreme Court tackled this head-on in the 2023 case of Revanus Adapa versus Mollikarjan. The court's whole analysis zeroed in on the Hindu Marriage Act, which legally says that children of void or voidable marriages are considered legitimate for inheritance. So the conclusion was absolutely revolutionary. These children are entitled to inherit the share their parent would have gotten in ancestral property, not just property their parent bought themselves.
And this comparison just makes the change so clear. Before this ruling, the common view was that these children could only inherit property their parent personally acquired. But the new rule from Revanus Adapa completely changed the game. Now, they are entitled to a share in their parents' portion of both self-acquired and ancestral joint family property. It's a massive shift.
Okay, let's apply this with a simple problem to see how it works. A Hindu male dies without a will. He leaves behind his widow, one son, two daughters, and his mother. The total value of his property is 5 lakh rupees. So, how is it divided?
The answer is 1 lakh rupees each. And why is that? Well, it's because the widow, the son, the two daughters, and the mother are all Class I heirs. And as we now know, Class I heirs all take their shares at the same time and in equal parts. So, you take 5 lakh rupees, divide it among 5 heirs, and you get 1 lakh rupees per person. As simple as that.
All right, let's move to our final section and pull everything we've covered together into a nice, clear summary of the key principles. This will be perfect for revision.
This table perfectly captures how much the law has evolved recently. When it comes to daughters as coparceners, all that ambiguity about whether the father had to be alive in 2005 was wiped out by the Vanita Sharma case, establishing an absolute birthright. For children from void marriages, the Revanus Adapa case expanded their rights from just self-acquired property to a share in ancestral property. And the Arunachala Goundra case from 2022 confirmed that a daughter's rights to her parents' self-acquired property are absolutely paramount.
When you really boil it all down, the modern philosophy of this law is crystal clear. As it stands today, the law ensures that inheritance is a matter of birthright. It's not about your gender, and it's not about the marital status of your parents.
And here are the final principles and terms to lock into your memory. Always remember Section 8 as the gold standard for the order of priority. Think of Section 14 as the Charter of Liberty for women, the section that makes them absolute owners. Propinquity just means how closely related someone is. Intestate, of course, means dying without a valid will, and absolute property means you have the full rights to sell or gift it as you please. If you keep these core concepts in mind, you'll have a really firm grasp on this essential area of law.